What's up, startup founders? My name's Sam Wong. I'm the CEO of Fundable Startups. I'm a startup CEO coach and a fractional founder. In this video, we'll talk with Simon Sturmer, a founder who got into Y Combinator. You probably know YC as the most respected startup accelerator. YC has a string of hits with over 90 companies that are now valued at more than $1 billion. So roughly 5% or 1 in 20 of YC accepted companies become unicorns. Let's dive into the conversation with Simon and talk about his experience getting into Y Combinator. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. My name is Sam Wong, and we are here to speak with Simon Sturmer about the topic of getting into Y Combinator. Obviously, a very popular topic given the volume of admission or applicants to YC. In the past year, according to YC's own stats, 44,000 companies applied to YC, and the acceptance rate in the past year was about 1.25%. The last cohort they had an under 1% acceptance rate, so it is quite an exclusive opportunity once if you are able to get accepted. Simon did get accepted, and what batch were you in, Simon?
I was in January 2021, so winter 21 they call it.
Winter 21. So that would have been a little over 2 years ago then. Okay. Almost 3 years ago.
Yeah, about 2.5.
All right. So we're going to just have an open conversation here. Feel free, if you have any questions, to go ahead and pop it into the chat. We'll try to pay attention to that. And we will open it up for live Q&A at the end. But during the conversation, we'll try to pull in questions that do pop up in the chat window. Okay. So just by way of introduction, I am Sam Wong. I'm CEO of a company called Fundable Startups. I have had the pain and pleasure of working at 5 different startups. The first 2 shut down. The last 3 did get acquired, thankfully. I work now as a CEO coach. Simon and I have known each other for maybe 4 years now. And Simon, why don't you introduce yourself to the crowd?
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. I'm Simon. I'm a software engineer. I've been a software engineer for over 20 years now. I've done everything from big tech to startups to consulting. I worked at Facebook back in 2013, 2014, 2015 as a front-end engineer. I ended up at Google in 2018, 2019, working on the YouTube team. I've started a few different companies over the years. And currently, since my YC adventure, I've been doing consulting. This is probably about the last 8 or 9 months. I've been doing consulting and teaching, mostly software engineering teaching, typically for larger companies. So I have my hands in a bunch of different things.
Right, right. Yeah, so Simon, you and I met maybe 4 years ago or so. Full disclosure, Simon and I worked together on one of his companies. So I found just the fact that I never told Simon this. This is not part of the plan and stuff. I'm not buttering him up. But I found Simon to be one of the most talented technical CTO developer leads that I'd come across recently. I've definitely confirmed that in our conversation working together. Simon, what are some of the ventures that you've been doing since you left some of the big tech companies?
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Sam. I appreciate that. I'll start with so before big tech, I built a mailing system that was similar to I guess you could say like MailChimp kind of won that battle, but it was very fragmented and there was a bunch of them. So I built a mail system like that back in 2000, I don't know, like 7. Ended up selling that for a very small amount of money, and but that was a fun adventure. And then what did I do after that? I did a web development consultancy that I put together after that. And we had a few staff, and then I ended up in big tech. And then after big tech, I put together a software consultancy or software studio, essentially an agency. After that, I kind of rebounded back into big tech. And then when I left Google, which is my second sort of foray into big tech, that's when I ultimately founded the startup that we're here to talk about today, the one that went through Y Combinator.
Got it. And tell us about that company. What was the nature of the company? What was his name? What did you guys do, etc.?
Yeah, so this was, like the time frame here is really relevant. So this was October 2020, or a little bit before that, then we started building this. It was October 2020 that we applied to get into Y Combinator. And so like given the landscape of the time, those of you who remember those years, it was very popular to build, like to try to solve the problem that people couldn't leave their homes and people couldn't go and meet together and do things together. And so what we built was a virtual events platform specifically for kind of small conferences and meetups would be our target audience. Although going into it, I think we were, kind of shooting for any sort of gathering, get together. Now, we have Zoom, there's plenty of options for that. Our sort of differentiator was that we were mobile, specifically mobile and audio first. So that kind of might remind you of Clubhouse if you use that during that time period. But whereas Clubhouse was kind of more for like creators and podcast type folks, this was specifically for conferences. So you could kind of have a character that you could move around this sort of world on the app, and you could go into a room to listen to a talk, or you could mingle. And the way mingling worked is that you could move your character kind of near another character in this little video game style world. And if you were within a certain proximity of the other sort of folks, you could have a two-way audio conversation with them, but you wouldn't have video as an attendee, if that makes sense. That might be too much detail, but that's essentially what we built.
Very interesting. Audio-centric meetup, then, if that's a reasonable way to describe it. Meetups and conferences. Okay. Yep. Fantastic. What prompted you to apply to YC?
So me and my co-founder had long wanted to get into the Y Combinator program. I mean, it's sort of a legend in the, in the Bay Area where we live here. And, I'd applied before, so many years before, probably 8 or 9 years before with a totally different person, and did not get in. And I thought, this is probably, I've built the resume. I've had some big tech on my resume. I have some previous ventures on my resume. I thought it was, essentially kind of a better chance, as good a chance as any to kind of, try my hand at that again. And ultimately it was the right time in that startup's journey, right? Because the startup hadn't, raised a bunch of money where you're kind of, too big to need that incubation stage. And at the same time, we were still kind of pre-launch when we applied. So it was like the right time in my life and the right time in the startup, I guess.
Okay, so you mentioned you were interested in applying. You'd applied once before in the past. What specifically interests you about YC? There's lots of different accelerators out there. Why YC for you?
Okay, so now that I've drank the Kool-Aid, I'm probably going to give you the like pro YC answer here. But it's the most, it's the biggest name in that space, right? I mean, there's other great ones. There's 500 startups. There's, there's numerous good ones out there. But in terms of track record and name and even just the doors it unlocks and the resources that are available to you once you kind of become part of that community, YC sort of currently holds the crown there. And so it's, when you think about joining a sort of top tier accelerator, that is like that one comes to mind. But I think maybe more on like a personal note, I've followed a lot of the startups that have been through YC before. I've had friends who've been through that. I knew the value there, right? I knew the value that is offered and how good that program is, right?
Got it. So at the time, what was the value of YC? Has changed their standard deal since. Right now, for companies that are newly accepted, YC offers $500,000 in funding. What was the funding that you got when you were accepted?
Yeah, it was $135K, if I remember right.
Okay.
And the 500K actually, we can get into that a little bit later, but there's like an asterisk next to that. So there's some, like I think you get a certain amount under one particular deal, and then the remainder of that under a separate deal, or at least that's how I read about it when they changed that deal. But they changed the deal after I joined. So the 135K isn't the main motivating factor, right? I mean, you can raise 135K from essentially, angels, friends, family. I have not ever raised from friends, family, but they say, what do they say? The 3S, friends, families, and fools who like invest in the super early stage before. But sure, like the 135K is not, that isn't the enormous value. I think the enormous value is that you get into a community where they're going to give you the forcing functions to succeed, give you the knowledge, the wisdom, the support structure. Like there's there's tons of different value you get out of it that doesn't have a monetary dollar sign on it, right?
Right, right, absolutely. I think people oftentimes get drawn by that big number. In fact, I'll be quite frank. I do a lot of work with Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator, and over at Skydeck, when we saw YC elevate the investment to 500K, everybody was like, "Oh man, they just raised the stakes for everybody." Skydeck went from investing 100,000 to 200,000 in companies. All right, so that kind of
Yep.
raise the expectations all across the industry. But that is a definitely something to consider. But it's interesting that you say that the cash isn't the real thing. What would you say were the other benefits besides the investment?
Yeah, and so I guess there's really two angles to that question. It's like, what did I perceive as the other benefits when I applied? Like, what did I want to get out? And then there's kind of like, now that I've been through the program and we're years later, what do I see as the kind of the in hindsight, the benefits? And so I think going into it, having the name Y Combinator, saying, we're a startup that is backed by Y Combinator, that helps you raise money, that helps you essentially sign deals, right? So if you're trying to sign a deal with a conference that's going to run on your platform, which would be the sort of thing we were looking to sign, or if you're trying to, raise, essentially get customers, get traction, having that name behind you helps a lot. So there's there's an angle there, which is the kind of I've been vetted, I've been validated by this this reputable name. Therefore, other people are going to be like, okay, like you get a few trustworthy points there, right? Or whether it's trustworthy or like de-risking, because investors look at it like,
Right.
Is it slightly less risk to invest in you because somebody else has vouched for you? And there's a little bit of a game there in the same sense that you can kind of like angle things a little way to kind of present less risk, but at the risk of without getting too sidetracked there into that particular angle of it, I think having that name is a huge piece, and having just like the wealth of just like brilliant people and advice and coaching that comes out of that was my initial motivating
Got it.
factor.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot more value that I'm sure we'll get into over the course of this conversation that I now look back on and see as well.
Got it. Absolutely. So lots of people here are probably interested in the application process. And people have always asked, like, do they need to have a certain amount of revenue, or how much maturity, et cetera? People kind of throw out these artificial numbers. Can you describe, just to help people get a perspective, help describe how mature your company was? It was called Huddle Fire. Was that right?
At the time, it was called Remix, but yeah, we later rebranded to Huddle Fires. So
Okay.
that is right. That's the company, and we did not have revenue. We didn't have a launched product when we applied, and we launched shortly after the batch started. And that is fairly common to be pre-product, essentially, going into Y Combinator. Now, it isn't necessary. It isn't like 100% the norm. But I think, like for example, like I knew many startups in my batch that had launched months before they entered. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have health tech or hardware, right? Hard tech, that it's like it takes years to develop. There was an aerospace company in our batch. It takes many years to develop something like that. So obviously they're not going to have a working product because they haven't raised tons of funds and everything yet. So you definitely span the spectrum. If you have a slightly more traditional business that isn't as kind of startup sexy in the way of in terms of like being a rocket ship, then you probably need other indicators like growth metrics or traction or revenue, things like that. But if you're kind of more on the building the proverbial rocket ship or an actual literal rocket ship, then I think they're looking at more different indicators, right?
Right. So don't necessarily have to have a shipping product, don't necessarily have to have revenue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Got it. I did happen to.
A lot of the AI.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. A lot of the AI companies that have gone through in the previous two batches. In fact, this most recent batch that had demo day last week was, I think, 60% AI companies, and almost all of them did not have a product when they went in.
Got it. In fact, let me quickly look here. I actually tried to compile some of the stats from some of the things that YC had published. Let's see. Of the latest batch, winter 2023, 77% had zero revenue before they applied. Okay. Only 2% had more than 50K of total revenue. So definitely revenue is not a requirement given the fact that 3/4 of the latest batch did not have revenue. On average, as you look over the last 2 years based on the stats that YC has published, it's more than 70%. 2/3 to 3/4 do not have revenue before they apply. Okay. There are a couple other questions here. Maybe I can kind of dig through them before we get lost in too many questions going through the chat. Let's see. Tim asked, does YC see a downswing in investor series funding given the current US market? Are there more YC activity in Asia, M&A projects in light of this? Okay. Trying to think about exactly what the question here is. There a downswing in investor series funding given the current U.S. market? I will say this: if you pay attention to some of the folks out the YC group partners, they have several podcasts and chats. I mean, if you're associated with YC, you're very popular to get interviewed. Okay, so there are a lot of the YC group partners who get interviews on podcasts, etc., and they've just mentioned how YC is a money printing machine. Okay, they are quite effective given the fact that they take an early 7% stake with pro rata rights to protect their investment through the initial the next follow-on round. They have done very well as a lot of their companies have succeeded. So I am going to guess, I do not have access to the YC bank account to see the state of their treasury, but I'm going to guess maybe they got a little bit of a hit, but there's still probably quite a lot of momentum behind them. So I'd be surprised if YC has had to pull back. I'd be very surprised if that's the case. They still accepted in the last batch 229 companies, okay, which is a lot of companies. And if you do the math on that, in fact, 229 at $500,000 invested, that's about $115 million in funding just from that batch. So all evidence would seem to suggest that YC still has a pretty tidy bank account. Okay.
Yeah, and the stat, when you talk about batch sizes that large and the amount of money they have to put into that, and that's just a piece of it because they're paying the group partners, which are very expensive. They're paying physical office space because they're coming back in person. All these other expenses that are not cheap, right? But the other stat to keep in mind there is that roughly 1 in 20 YC companies goes on to become a unicorn, which is industry terminology for $1 billion valuation. So there is no shortage of return on that investment either, right?
Yes, they have quite a winning streak there with their companies. Maybe I could just ask you a couple other thoughts about the application itself. There are 4 major parts of the application. There's the informational form. You fill out a bunch of form on a bunch of fields on a Google, well, not Google form, something that looks like a Google form. Okay. There's a demo video, there's a founder video, and then if you're shortlisted in an interview, did anybody help you prepare the application or review your application?
No. Review, yes. Prepared, no. And my thought on that is that having someone help you prepare, or you know what? Okay, that could probably mean a lot of things. But in terms of like the way I approach it is that I wanted to go through and think carefully about all the questions they're asking and kind of reflect on like what those kind of mean to me and how that applies to me. Whereas like I'm sure I could have somebody who's going to give me like the more like correct answer where it's like, hey, if you say X, you're gonna have a better chance than Y. And I figured I'll just punt that over to kind of the review process afterwards. I kind of really wanted to capture what my vision was for the product, what my vision is for the problem that we're solving and things like that. And then it also kind of allowed me to really reflect on because they ask some pretty hard-hitting questions in there, right? And it gives you a chance to kind of reflect on like, what would I do in that situation and how would I handle that? And, am I prepared for these sort of outcomes and things? And I think so to kind of like simmer on that and come up with your sort of own sort of honest answers is already a boost. That already helps you. That already makes you think about things that you may not have even thought about because you're so busy like writing code or building product or whatever, right? That you're not stopping to think about these things. So I really wanted to spend the time to kind of go through and put that together. And then number two, like having somebody review it, that can always help, right? Because somebody be like, dude, this is way too wordy. This isn't focused enough. This isn't really clear what your answer is. Like, you know, that's broad advice for sort of anytime you're putting something like that together, I think, right? Now, if you can have somebody who's been through YC or, you know, been through the interview process even, that, you know, they have a better understanding of what sorts of questions get asked. So that's even more helpful,
Right, right. I kind of compare it sometimes to being a pitch judge for startup pitch events. I usually serve as a pitch judge about once a month or so, and you get 6, 8, 10 companies who are part of this program for one evening or one weekend, whatever, and they're trying to tell you about the company. And what I found is that one of the most difficult things to do is to understand what the company does. And I will say this is that in the times we've talked and worked together, Simon, you've been pretty articulate. So I'd like to imagine that what you wrote in the application was pretty clear. In fact, a lot of the YC partners do talk about the fact that they got to understand what you do. Lee Iacocca made had a quote a while back that you may have a great idea. I'm paraphrasing up here. You may have a great idea, but if you can't communicate it, it won't matter. Okay, so I found that oftentimes stuff like the YC application, the clarity of your communication is very, very important. It's almost like a writing skill, basically. How well you write will be, if you're a good writer, that will probably help you prepare a better application. Okay, got it. So how much time did it take for you to prepare the application?
You know, I time boxed myself to about a week for various reasons. One, we were building a startup and there's lots of other things to do. And secondly, there's deadlines, like there's dates that you have to apply before. So we set aside a week, maybe not dedicated 8 hours a day, but we tried to get it done in a week. And then that Saturday, kind of after that work week, we filmed the 1 minute video. Probably filmed about 12 takes, but yeah, we put together the founder video with it.
Got it. Yeah, there's a question from Shahina about solo founders, especially if the MVP or startup is built with no code. You had responded via chat, but I think this is an important topic to hit. Can you elaborate on why, if you're a solo founder or if you're not technical, how that might affect your application process?
Right. So I think there's various sort of, you know, little small disadvantages that you might be at, and any one of them isn't going to disqualify you. But let me kind of speak to the solo founder first. So the reason that's considered a disadvantage is because YC has verbally mentioned multiple times, I think openly, publicly, that they prefer 2 or 3 co-founders, right? Sometimes they'll take 4 or more, but that's probably on the high end. But the ideal number is 2 or 3. And the reason for that is because if you have a solo founder, there's less, I guess, like checks and balances. I don't know if I'm going to capture the reasoning behind this perfectly, but essentially there's less checks and balances. It's easier for one person to get kind of burnt out, give up, just kind of like pack it all in, you know, whereas, I mean, anybody can get burnt out, but I think with 2 co-founders, you know, you have the start of an actual company that isn't just a solo project. You know what? I would look into what Michael Seibel has said on that specifically. There's like the YC YouTube channel. They talk about that a lot. But anyway, that was my little kind of attempt at an explanation of why they prefer not a solo founder. Now, it won't exclude you. I know various solo founders within my batch. And so, but that's just one small disadvantage. So the second disadvantage is if 0 of the founders are technical, right? You don't need all technical founders, but typically they would like to see one of them. And the reason behind that is because oftentimes then folks who don't have a technical person, like sure, you can solve technical things by hiring or, you know, bringing in consultants and things, but it just puts you at more of a disadvantage because somebody might, I don't know, sell you things that you don't need. It's kind of like if you don't know anything about cars, you take your car in. I know you love these analogies, Sam, around that, but you take your car into the shop. They're going to make some stuff up. They certainly might make some stuff up, and you have no idea if they're scamming you or whatever. And so that can be the case when you're bringing on technical hires and you don't have a technical co-founder. That's one of the disadvantages. And anyway, I'm probably going too deep into this question, but yeah. So if you start stacking these disadvantages on top of each other, you know, you're not doing yourself any favors. But sure, like if you're a solo founder and you don't have a co-founder right now, like apply, right? If you're not technical, you know, apply anyway. Give it a go.
Right, right. I do know that YC has often mentioned the fact that they want to see somebody on the founding team who can build the product. If you're doing drug development, hopefully you have somebody who's a PhD in microbiology or cellular molecular biology, whatever the case may be, something relevant to that. Or if your company is going to build an app, hopefully you have somebody who can code. Okay. So Simon, you obviously have a technical background. You've been a developer for many years and a CTO. You said you had a co-founder. What was that co-founder's skill set?
So he had been at more big tech companies than I have. So we worked together at Facebook, which is where we met. He then went from there to Twitter. Then we worked together again at Google. He was in Google Cloud. I was in YouTube. And then after Google, he went to TikTok. And so he was at TikTok at the time that we applied. In fact, he was director of marketing US at TikTok when we applied. And so that helped enormously because he had the big names on his resume and he had done non-technical roles at these companies, like particularly, so I think he was a PMM at Facebook and he ended up in more on the marketing side. But like he'd done several non-technical roles at scale. Now, I think we as startup founders probably know that like those skills don't necessarily transfer. Like just because you've done some big company, whatever fancy title does not necessarily transfer. In fact, sometimes it can be the opposite of what you need, and same in tech, right? So like just because I was an engineer at Google where we can spend 9 months cranking on a project and go through design reviews is totally different than trying to build a scrappy product that we need to get out in a few weeks. Totally different skill set. Right. But these are indicators that I think investors and incubators and stuff look for, right?
Right. Yeah, just as a sidebar, a friend of mine runs the Silicon Valley podcast. His name's Sean Flynn, and he happened to interview one of the founders of Square, and Square being obviously credit card processing effectively was one of the key things that they did. And early on, they hired a VP from MasterCard to be one of the senior executives. And as it turned out, that particular company, that particular hire did not fit. And it wasn't because the person didn't know their stuff. It was that person was stuck in how big companies do things. Credit card processing had lots of rules to follow, and he wanted to make sure all the rules were followed. Unfortunately, the young companies like that ended up coloring outside the lines sometimes just to get things done, if you will. So that ended up being an interesting story of how that did not work out. Not saying it's always going to be that situation, but you kind of have to be very selective about the type of people that you have. So to be clear, your co-founder then was the person technical?
No, he was not technical, and that was actually kind of that was our dynamic, right? So he would handle non-technical things, and I would handle technical things, and that's a pretty common combo.
Got it. All right. So definitely, that's good to be able to hear. I know that people have talked about in the past the holy trinity of founding team has a hustler, a hacker, and a hipster. So you probably play the hacker role. Hopefully somebody in marketing would have the hipster role, kind of building and telling people about something that's cool. Then maybe you guys shared the hustle type of aspect. Okay, got it. So what did you focus on when you created the founder video? That seems like you said you had 12 takes. Why 12 and what did you focus on?
So you only have a minute. You have 60 seconds. And so like imagine all the things that you want to say about how great your idea is and how great your founding team is and how great your product is, but you have 60 seconds. And so you end up having to, besides all the normal just like bloopers or whatever, you end up having to try to like distill what you have to say. And like you can't put the whole application there. They're going to read the application anyway. So what you need to do is you just need to seem, like, I don't know, likable, charismatic. I mean, we all know techies and stuff startup founders aren't necessarily charismatic, but like do your best to, put your charismatic hat on or whatever. Just try to, make an impression. I don't know, this is your chance. This is the first time they're seeing your face or hearing your voice, and just this is your chance to kind of woo them a little bit or make a splash. But at the same time, you got to do it in a short amount of time and you have facts to get through. You got to be like, you got to cover who we are, why we're the right people for this. Like, why are we the right founders? And why is the idea that we're building something that the world wants, right?
Mm-hmm. Got it. Interesting. Okay. So there's a question from Craig asking about he's got a company apparently over $70,000 ARR, but still sees value in optimizing early wins towards Series A by going through an accelerator like YC, or Do you have a comment on, okay, somebody who's got some traction with revenue, how does going through YC or a similar accelerator help, hurt, or what would be the trade-offs and considerations there?
So having revenue helps, but I think there's also the idea of looking at the chart of revenue over time. And so if your revenue has been like this for like, 4 years, and it's like last year you were at 60K and the year before that you were at 50K, it's like that is a good lifestyle business. It's probably steadily going to grow. You can, get to a point where you can live off that income at some point, depending on what your costs are. But that may not be what YC is looking for. So I think what they're looking for is that like hockey stick curve, that like fabled sort of like knee in the curves. So they're looking for, month over month kind of growth numbers. So it isn't necessarily the quantitative value of 70K. It would be like, hey, we went from 30K to 70K in 6 months. And then they'd be like, oh, wow, okay, you're doubling, every 6 months, something like that. And so, but of course, like they may not even consider that metric, right? So if you don't have a product that they think fits with their thesis, I mean, they don't have a specific thesis like investors do, but if you don't have a product that kind of fits with what they think can be, $1 billion company or can, change the world in the ways that kind of Y Combinator is looking to craft these sorts of startups, then, the revenue numbers may not even matter, right?
Got it. Okay. So there's another question from Eve about the world being captivated by Gen AI, Web3, metaverse, blah, blah, blah. And then potentially rising interest in environmental social governance. Do you have a perspective on the type of startup category YC might be most interested in?
Yeah, so in my batch, it was, as you can imagine, tons of like Web3 and blockchain and crypto, right? Like that was the hype at that time. But also because it was during the pandemic, there was just a ton of like social and people who are trying to either do remote work or distributed teams, or, I mean, there was even things around like the mental health of a distributed team, right? How to make sure that everybody who's like, work from home in all these different locations can kind of feel like part of a team, or like there's all these aspects around what was relevant at that time. And that might have been coincidental, except for the fact that as the trends have changed, now I'm seeing them push really hard into AI as investors and everybody else is. So, relevant to the time, right? I mean, you can be too early, it reminds me of like Google Glass when they came out, the wearables, that was too early. And now, the Oculus and these other folks are doing it, it might be the right time. So you can be too early, you can also be too late. Like if you come out right now with like robotic food preparation, you're probably a little late on that in terms of like there's already like some sourness in the investor. It's a whole other story, but there's some sourness in some failed startups in that space. But like, so the timing is right. There's a lot of biotech happening right now. There's a lot of environmental tech happening right now. Hard tech is always there. There's things related to I mean, obviously right now AI, but like AI can apply to all sorts of industries, right? I mean, you could have an AI companion, like a little clippy that's like telling you what to do, or an AI assistant, or you could have AI that's helping to do, image recognition for self-driving cars. Those are very different applications of AI, right? And so I think they're looking across the board at those sorts of things because those are, that's uncharted territory. There's tons of opportunity in that space, right? So anyway, relevance has big opportunity, and something that like they'll invest in an occasional like super traditional company. There was a company in my batch that was an ISP in Canada. They're like an actual internet service provider, and they had some cool, interesting takes on it and everything. So traditional companies can get through, but it'll be an uphill battle, right?
Got it. Okay. So I think Eve's question actually separates into two parts. That she had a technical component, which was the Gen AI, Web3, et cetera, then an industry focus. You mentioned earlier that the last batch, what was it? 70%, 60% was AI focused?
60% AI. Yeah.
60%.
I mean, that's what I've heard. I don't have the exact data, but yeah. So what I've been told is 60%, 60% AI startups. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. That's a huge percentage. And I do have stats on the industry. So the last batch, well, let's go with averages first. 49% in the last 2 years, 49% of YC companies that were accepted were B2B SaaS or enterprise. So half. All right. The next biggest category was fintech at 17%. So 1 out of 6. After that was dev tools, 1 out of 8, 12%. And after that is healthcare or life sciences at just under 10%, 9% average. in the last batch, 70% was B2B SaaS or enterprise. So there is clearly in over the last 2 years, they have a tendency as industry goes to focus on enterprise, especially if you have some type of SaaS recurring revenue. I think a lot of it is that the SaaS / recurring revenue types of business models has been proven and has good, solid metrics behind it. So it's easier to be able to measure the effectiveness and the potential growth opportunity behind a company with a B2B SaaS model. Okay. So that's, I'll pop some of that
it's
into
probably
the chat.
It's probably worth mentioning that there's overlap there, right? So you can be a B2B SaaS and be an AI company, or you can be a dev tool and be an AI, and maybe what's interesting is like when you look at the, I know I've been saying AI a lot, but let's like take that out of the equation and look at, Stripe, right? Stripe was a YC company. It was very successful. Was it a dev tool or was it fintech? I mean, it was kind of both, right? It was processing credit cards, but for developers, right? Like their entire goal was like, hey, you're an indie dev who has like a website, you want to take $10 payments, you can integrate this in 5 minutes and have a pay now button, right? So they were a dev tool as well, right?
Yeah, interesting. Definitely how you classify that, but okay, that's good. Maybe we kind of dig into what it was like to what happened after you were accepted into YC.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, obviously you feel on top of the world and you feel like you're going to make the next $1 billion startup because you got the yes from someone, but it's like such a small, like that is a small indicator, a small, step in the very long journey, but it is a like really important one, right? So it's like you get the yes, or maybe I should even back up and say, like what does the process look like? So you put in the application, you get an email that says, hey, we'd like to interview you. You do I want to say it's like 5 minutes or 9 minutes Zoom interview. You don't have time to do a lot there. And then after that, you either get the yes call same day typically, or you get a no email. Occasionally, you'll get a call that says, hey, we want to follow up, like we're on the fence. Because there'll be like 3 decision makers, typically 3 group partners in the Zoom call with you. And I don't know if they have to vote, if there can be like a hung jury or whatever, but sometimes they'll have a follow-up interview, right?
Somebody can filibuster.
Yeah, I think so, right? Like somebody has clout enough to be like, I override you. And so, in fact, like of our 3 interviewers, one of them ended up being our group partner, and group partner is something we can talk about shortly. But without getting too far off track from the question, so you go through that process, you get the yes call, and then they'll call one of the 2 founders. I think it's whichever phone number you put on the application as the primary, and then within I think hours, you get an email with instructions on how to join this online community, and you get a login to this thing. They call it Bookface, but it's way more than that. Bookface, I think, was originally a play on words on Facebook or whatever, but somehow that terminology stuck. But it's essentially this portal, this online portal that is like a lot of the resources and stuff that you get out of YC. So you get to log into that really soon, and then poof, you're like in this wealth of knowledge. And keep in mind that can be several months before the batch. So I think we got the call end of October, early November, and then the batch started like January 16th or something, right? And so you have 2 months to prep, to like there's oftentimes things you need to do during that time. So anyway, I should probably pause there before I get kind of too off track, but does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. All right. Got it. So looking back in hindsight, what would you say were the top 3 benefits that you received from going through YC?
So during the batch, I probably wouldn't have the same answer as I have now. So during the batch, I'd be like, wow, like I'm learning so much. And there's like literally a user manual for like everything I could imagine, from like, vetting a VC to like reaching out to investors to incorporating a company or doing what they call the Delaware flip, which is let's say you're an overseas founder and you need to essentially incorporate in one of the 3 approved. So YC wants you to have a company in order to get your investment money. You have to have a company in one of 3 things. It's the U.S. state of Delaware, it's Singapore, or it's the Cayman Islands. And so you have to have, just because those are founder-friendly jurisdictions or whatever. And so like if you, let's say, incorporate in the UK, you need to do what they call the Delaware flip, which is where you incorporate a company in Delaware that essentially buys your UK company. So I'm probably getting off track there, but like the takeaway is that there's like an instruction manual, like a built-in guide for like every one of these things that you could possibly need to do, whether it's like hiring or finding a co-founder or whatever, raising money. And not only is that guide itself helpful, but like when you run into things, you can bounce it by your group partner, which is essentially your mentor during the program, your small groups. You'll have like a section of other founders that have many of whom have been through these things, or you could ask on kind of the general kind of internal forum that they have. So there's like all these resources that are available to you, which I think was incredibly helpful during the batch, right? But now in hindsight, when I look at it, it's like, yeah, all that was helpful and everything, but there's like a motivating factor because they force you to leave your full-time job. You got to do this full-time if you're going to get if you're going to get in, things like that. So they kind of force you into this like good patterns, good habits. There's a lot of in-person stuff now that it's back in person that there wasn't when I was going through. And then ultimately, then you get this like long-running community. So I have this alumni network that is now like super valuable, which is one of my favorite kind of takeaways from the program.
Yeah, okay. That's good to know. There's another question I'm going to take from the chat from Harshal regarding writing the application. And Harshal's comment was, while I'm expressing my product, am I making the application over the top given the number of applications they read? So that's a little bit of a balance because we can't see what you're actually writing and what you're saying. You want to make sure, of course, that your application, your description of what you're doing is clear. That's number one. If not clear, then it doesn't matter how underwhelming or overwhelming you might be, people just won't understand. So make sure that it's clear. The YC folks do talk about don't obfuscate or don't use marketing buzzwords like we're democratizing the transformation of generative AI. Okay, that doesn't say anything. Or we're going to be the most transformative enterprise company, etc. That's an empty claim that could apply to anybody. Okay, so steer away from the marketing buzzwords, hype story type of thing. Be specific. Use plain and simple English. If you do think you're doing something special, there's nothing wrong with highlighting that. You can say, if it's not over top to say, we reduce costs of X by 75%, if that's true. Okay, and as a result of doing that, we have grown our customer base from 10 people to 100 people in 6 months. Okay. Just state clear factual data and let the data brag for you. Okay, rather than trying to hype up, oh, Simon's walks on water as a developer, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't really mean anything. Okay. So just be very, very specific. Nothing wrong with selling, but don't use hypey type of marketing buzzwords. All right. Okay.
That just reminds me of one of my favorite expressions.
Oh, go ahead.
What do they say? Oh yeah, building a product from a specification and walking on water are both easy if they're frozen. Right? The specification is frozen, you can build the product on that spec. The water's frozen, you can walk on water. It's more of a software industry thing. But anyway, continue. Yeah, that's not
totally get that. Okay. Every time I talk to you, Simon, I feel the itch to just go back and be a developer again. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So what advice, Simon, would you give to other entrepreneurs who are thinking about applying to YC?
Yeah, so get your ducks in a row first in terms of if you need to find that co-founder, go out there and start looking. If you need to, kind of get your idea refined or whatever, go ahead and do that. But like, don't bite shed on that for a year. Don't just be like, oh, look, I'm not quite ready, because you also just need to get out there and do it. So, get just enough, in line that you can have some answers to these. I mean, and you can go and open the application at any time and start filling it out or start looking at the questions and things. And then when you get to one that you're stuck and we're like, oh, shoot, I need to go polish that up so I have a better answer for that, and that question might be like, what is your go-to-market strategy? Or, how do you differentiate yourself from, actually a great question that they have is like, who are the other people in this space who are solving that problem and how are you different or better than them, right? So like I'm paraphrasing, but something like that. And you might have to stop and be like, oh, shoot, how am I different than them? And then you need like a really good answer to that sort of thing, right? So it actually gives you enough to kind of mentally chew on anyway. So yeah, go start the process. And if it turns out you're like, okay, I really need to go and find this co-founder first, or, hey, I really need to have a better answer for X, then you can kind of get your ducks in order. But there's also deadlines. Like, for example, I think the deadline for this upcoming batch, which will start in January, I want to say the deadline is like end of September or mid-October or something.
Yeah, the next deadline is October 13th. Okay.
Thank you. All
Yeah.
right, you got it.
But that's not a hard and fast deadline. They've always said that if you they still consider applications outside of the deadline, but just be aware that their internal processes are optimized for the deadline. So if you
Yep.
apply and you miss the deadline, okay, will they still look at it? Maybe, okay, but they may not have all of the infrastructure, all the processes, all the partners, locked in a room for 2 weeks doing X. Okay, so definitely hitting the
Yeah.
deadline is best, but if you for whatever reason miss the deadline by a week, it's probably not the end of the world. It's probably still apply. Okay, got it.
And so maybe one additional thing on that is that, like, I know I said kind of get your stuff in order or whatever, but you don't have to have everything. So a great example is like, you can have a day job and apply. Now you're going to have to quit that day job if you get accepted, because they want you to be full time on this. But like, don't be like, oh shoot, like, what am I going to do about healthcare if I quit my day job? So I can't do that yet, and so I can't apply yet. Things like that. Like, just apply, because like once you get in or even get the interview, then you can. Okay, here's a great example. We didn't have the legal entity established when we applied. We did that between application and the interview. We like jumped onto Stripe Atlas and incorporated into Delaware, right? And so like it's fine for that. Like that's totally fine. So yeah, get certain things in order, like having a co-founder and get your product idea polished, or at least that you can explain what it is in a few words. But like you don't have to have, okay, I've quit my job, I've incorporated my company, I've got like every legal document in place. Like don't worry about that stuff as much, right?
Got it. Okay. So interesting question from Orkan. He's got a comment that he's heard YC is not only accelerator but a software company. Do they really help you find B2B customers, investors, and partnerships at scale?
Okay, I guess there's two parts to that. So are they a software company? Let me punt on that question for a second. What was the second piece? Do they help you find customers
B2B
and
customers, investors, and
scale?
Partnerships at scale?
Not in the sense that you might think. They teach you how. There's a network effect of being part of this community where you can oftentimes sell to your batchmates. I mean, if you have a really compelling, you don't want to be that spammy salesperson, but if you have a really compelling product that you think is going to serve the needs of other startups, and even more mature companies, because many of the startups that were startups, 8 years ago in the YC batch, whatever, are now larger companies. So you can sell to other YC companies, and they're going to be more likely to be, take a bet on you because you're in that community with them. So in that sense, it helps. Like, sure, there's a user manual on like, how to tackle really long sales cycles, which is often enterprise B2B sales cycles. There's advice from people, and you can reach out to your peers and get help there. But like nobody's going to help you actually do it, right? Like founder sales is such a core piece of YC. They're like we expect, like, don't hire a salesperson. Founders should be doing sales because you're the most passionate about the product. You understand it inside and out. Like at this stage, at the going through the batch, they want you to go out and be selling your product. But sure, like lead gen and stuff, it can help.
Sure. I definitely heard the same thing. And in fact, if you happen to have a startup that services a lot of the needs of other startups, then selling to your other YC cohort companies is definitely a thing. I understand Pulley is a YC company, and Pulley does cap table management. Basically, they compete with Carta, and I understand that Pulley got a good number of other YC startup founders to sign up. Okay. So
that's what happens internally, right? So
yeah.
like everybody just uses, like there's like a YC company for every aspect of whatever you need, right? So like we use Rippling for payroll, and there's even another YC company, which is Gusto. So it's like we're choosing between two YC companies, and we're not even thinking about like looking outside of the batch because we have it all within our community. And you have that advantage of like if something goes wrong. A great example is I use Mercury for banking, which is kind of this like modern startup bank. And the founder of Mercury, even though Mercury was not a YC company, the founder is in the YC community network. He's an alum. So like I saw somebody reach out with an issue with their bank, and like the founder of the bank was like, oh, I'll get somebody on that right away and help you solve it. So you get some advantages of choosing within the kind of community as well, right?
Definitely the network. Wisely use the network, I guess what I'm hearing. Okay. Okay. Do you have any experience, Simon, with YC Startup School?
I don't.
Okay.
But I know of very few folks who've been through the startup school and then ultimately like got into our batch. So I don't. Okay. So the only thing I can say on is I don't think it's like a super strong. I know it was initially pitched as like a pathway to kind of like like a light version of their main accelerator, and they do teach you some of those things, but I don't think it's necessarily going to raise your chances of getting in going through that program. Go through that program if you need the knowledge or if you just need that accountability or whatever, but don't necessarily go through that program thinking that it's going to like help your application afterwards. I don't have any evidence that it does.
Yeah, so I have some experience with that. I had signed up for
Okay.
startup school way back when, and just to be able to network and build a community, et cetera. And what I found was that startup school was a self-paced, do-it-yourself type of. You watch these designated YC videos on certain topics, and the videos are all very good. The startup school might give you a little bit of structure to make sure that you stay on track. And then they used to do these community gatherings, or these group gatherings, not community gatherings, group gatherings where you're trying to get help. The reality is you're not going to get help in startup school from a YC partner. There's just too many companies, and they don't have enough time to focus on that. They may point you to a pre-recorded video, and then when they were doing group sessions, other founders were trying to you'd meet with other founders and talk about specific needs or challenges. And it ended up happening was that you didn't usually have founders who actually had been there and could tell you what to do. You had founders you could talk to, and maybe they could give some insights, but those insights may have been from a rookie to another rookie. What you really want is a veteran helping you as a rookie. Okay. So I found that was challenging, and that's one thing that I'd like to maybe kind of wrap up before we open it up to just questions. I want to make a comment about what YC really is here, and in essence, it's a program to help you learn. Some of the learning comes from the online sessions or the live sessions, and some of it is going to come from the mentoring and from the partners, etc. But it really is just that simple. It's a focus on structured learning, and they have great learning resources. I've actually found that that's absolutely critical to helping most companies be successful, is you as a founder and your ability to learn. So we have another opportunity to talk about that. Let's see here. I'm going to share a quick slide. This is an event that we are doing at the end of the month, really talking about learning as a commitment to be able to just be successful as a founder. So you can scan that QR code and it'll take you to the registration site. It's just a quick topic really about founder startup fit. And in my experience as a startup coach, the companies and the people that I want to work with are people who are invested in learning, because that is absolutely key. So we also, as our company, Fundable Startups, we invest in that as well. We have an academy called Fundability Before Fundraising. It's delivered in 2 6-week programs. First half focused on fundability, second half focused on fundraising. It involves 2 hours of live instruction each week, 2 hours of coaching and follow-up from working with me. Access to a community. We also do a lot of pitch deck work and group feedback. In the second half, the last 6 weeks, there's an opportunity to pitch to 5 investors. And if you choose to register, we will draw from 2 people an opportunity to get a pass to TechCrunch Disrupt, which is next week. Okay, so this is the detail. If you want to get some information about our Fundability Before Fundraising Academy, you can scan that QR code. It'll take you to a web page that summarizes it. Okay, so I'll leave this up here and then take a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up for just live Q&A. Okay, maybe Simon, do you have any specific details, or how do you want to people to contact you? I think a lot of people would love to be able to pick your brain a little bit more. How should people contact you?
Let me put in the chat my LinkedIn, and the username that I use on LinkedIn, which is SSTUR, is pretty much the username I use on everything, from GitHub to whatever, Facebook, but don't reach out to me on Facebook. I don't use Facebook. Let me also put my email in just as a good kind of backup. So yeah, those are the 2 ways to easily contact me. Yeah, I mean, I have limited capacity in terms of helping folks. I do startup advising and stuff like that every to some extent, but happy to field some like simple questions, or if you just have some thoughts on your mind, reach out to me anytime.
Yeah, and just a practical tip, because I think, Simon, you've got a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for sharing a lot of that here. A practical tip for folks. We all want to be able to help because that's the founder community. I want to be able to help, but the reality is, when you have some background knowledge to be able to share, what will end up happening is you get just swarmed by lots of people. So if, I sell training and coaching services, and I want to be able to help even people who may not be able to, don't have the resources to be able to sign up for some of our paid programs. I want to still be able to help. I try to do that, but just be aware that it is generally pretty hard to find somebody who's really qualified who can just volunteer. Okay. The people who volunteer are probably not in high demand for a reason. So people who are skilled I think, are very open to helping, but there's just a limited capacity. If you're lucky enough to get some of their time, then that's fantastic. It's just difficult for folks who want to help to be able to help everybody who needs the help. Okay, why don't we just open it up for Q&A here? Bao asked, what if a direct competitor just got accepted in the last batch? They do the same work, but maybe Bao thinks that they do it better. Okay, competitor in a previous batch. Thought on that.
Just have YC is not like, so historically some of the investment firms like Sequoia and stuff are well known for like only investing in one particular startup in a particular space. YC is not that case. YC has tons of competitors within the alumni network. So just have a good answer of when they ask, like, how are you differentiated from your competitors? Just be aware of that competitor, what they do, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and have an answer.
Sandy asked a question about foreign nationals. Simon answered it live. Yes, it is possible to have somebody who's not in the U.S. In fact, YC doesn't publish quite as many stats on originating countries, but only about 50 to 58% of startups are based in the U.S. Okay, so that means a little bit less than half of startups that are accepted are based outside of the U.S. Okay.
Yeah. And in general, you don't have to worry about like having a permanent residency in the U.S. Like just the way the laws kind of work in the U.S., my understanding of it anyway, is that like foreign people can own a business in the U.S. and you don't have to have a green card or work visa or anything like that. Now, it doesn't mean you can live here just because you want to start up here, but it means you can kind of come and do business and go again, including even just coming for the in-person batch and then going back to your home country, things like that. So it's no issue at all.
One of the Zoom users asked about a company that builds reusable inflatable barriers for protecting people from life-threatening threats. Okay, not tech, but does YC have any bandwidth for this type of physical product?
I've seen tons of stuff like that. I've seen one person in my batch go through because he was making sunscreen. Okay, sure, there's technical components of sunscreen in terms of biotech, but like, doesn't mean he can write code or anything. So yeah, I would absolutely pitch things like that for sure.
Yeah, especially if you have something that has venture scale capabilities. Okay. Simon referred to it earlier, the difference between a lifestyle business, which can be very profitable and very good for the founders, versus a venture scale business where the investors make dramatically more than what they put at risk early on. Okay, something that is 20, 50, 100x return on investment for the investors is probably the typical target of a venture investor, and effectively YC is a venture investor as well. That's how they make money. They are an investor.
I guess I can go first. What are some of the questions should founders think about when they get that interview call from YC, that the YC are gonna like ask you in the interview?
Yeah, so I probably won't be able to cover that in depth here, and there's tons of resources online, but it's going to be things like, and it's rapid fire, right? So like that interview is just, it's kind of crazy. You need to think on your toes and everything. And so, you'll end up, maybe it's like prepping for the SAT or whatever that is, where you're like, end up studying, 100 sample questions, and you'll get, well, at least in the YC case, you're going to get 5 or 10 of those 100 that you studied. But it could be things like, what's your differentiator? Why are you the right founders to do it? What's your go-to-market strategy? What happens if one of the big companies like Google comes out with something that competes with you? What's your approach if you have a co-founder dispute? Like, there's tons of these kinds of questions, and you can find lists of them.
Let's see. Oh, Veronica asked a question for Simon. Thanks for answering already in the chat. Applied and didn't get in. Would you recommend applying more than once? There's actually, YC publishes stats about that. So on average, in the last 2 years, looking at my spreadsheet here, 55% of the companies that were accepted had previously applied at least one other time. So that's actually not a bad thing. If you apply, get rejected, and you're still working on your idea, go ahead and apply again, especially if you can demonstrate some progress from the last time you applied. YC partners have said that that is actually a positive thing if they can see that, okay, you were at this stage of maturity before, it's now 6 months or 12 months later, and you're that much further along. That's actually a positive sign. Tim's the last one there. Is the 7% non-negotiable?
It is non-negotiable. They don't, like, when they give you that contract, you don't take it to your lawyer and get it redlined, or, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but they're like, this is the standard deal. That's why it's called a standard deal. And for an early stage startup, it's like, I haven't launched my product yet. Like, when I got in, I'm like, I haven't launched my product yet. What is 7% of zero? Like, it's no big deal to give them 7%, like, for the value I get out of it. But like, I also talked to a business that had multiple brick and mortar locations, and they were like, and some existing investors, and they were like, 7% at this point is kind of a lot to give away for 135K. My other investors are going to be pissed because, they got in a different, economics or dynamics, and YC will help you navigate that. Like, if you end up getting accepted and you're like trying to figure out, what am I going to say to my existing investors, or how do I justify this? Like, they'll help you with that, or, they'll be like, okay, you don't have to if you don't want to, but like, I think it's a very reasonable deal. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's been said that as classic investments go, 7% for $125,000 works out to be just under a $1.8 million valuation. That's not a high valuation. However, we have to look at what value you're generally getting from YC in general. And it's more than just the cash. It's the network. It's the cachet of being accepted. It's the opportunity to go through a high quality program, etc. Do keep in mind that there is a second follow-on safe as well, which it's indeterminate how much stock that second safe will convert into. Could be anywhere from 2 to 4 to 5%, whatever, because the structure of the second component, $375,000 is in the most favored nation safe, and that will convert. How much stock that will convert into depends on what terms you give away for any other safe offerings, and what the final converting event, the preferred stock fundraise, ends up being. Okay.
That sounds complicated, and I would say, like, in general, and it is complicated, but in general, I would say don't worry too much about that, because it's like it turns out to be super fair. I think it's probably the takeaway.
Yeah.
I don't know. You think it's pretty fair, Sam?
I think the value of getting into YC is pretty high, unless you're able to justify a higher investment and you already have some veteran skills. Okay. Sometimes I've heard an investor say, don't get into it. Don't take that YC deal because it's really low valuation. And yes, that is true. There is some truth to that. However, my counter to that would be, would you be ready to beat YC's terms and invest in me? If they're not ready to do that, then they why are they giving you the advice? Okay. If you get accepted YC and they're going to give you the cash for 7% plus whatever the second safe end up being, if that's still a pretty attractive deal. Okay. Oh, Simon, anything else you want to say before we go?
No, I just want to say, folks, thanks for sticking around and hearing us kind of ramble on about things that we're passionate about, and I hope that passion translated to something y'all can get some value out of. So thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
All right, great. Wrap it up now. Thanks, Simon, for your time.